What's going on? This is Brandon with Inspired Resolutions. Tonight I am going to talk about boundaries. It is one of those concepts that everybody thinks they have a handle on, and they liken it to punishment and reward, or contracts with people, or wanting something so bad that's healthy, and then you tell somebody that that's what you want, and you think that you've set some sort of boundary. So I'm going to clear the air about boundaries. I hope that you understand them better and can set them on your own in a way that feels healthy. So let's kind of dive into it. Boundaries, as I talk about boundaries, you're going to hear me talk about the spirit of boundary setting, because I don't just think that you can technically set boundaries, because sometimes when especially parents set boundaries, they maybe follow all the rules and that we discuss, but the spirit behind the boundary is still punishment and reward, and so they don't get the benefits of having healthy boundaries because the spirit of the boundary isn't set right. But to get to the point that you have set your boundary spirit, you've got to first detach with love. And I know that sounds like kind of a funny concept, but it's an important one. You're going to detach with love from your fantasy, the fantasy of having, for instance, your child change in the way that you wanted them to change, or take out the trash, or you're going to detach from the fantasy of changing whoever it is that we're dealing with. And so it's important to understand the end goal. The end goal isn't to change anybody. The end goal of a boundary is to control the things that you actually have control over, let go of the things that you don't have any control over. It's to focus on things that work. It is to get out of the insanity of resentment and anger and insane conversations, the arguments, and the chaos. So the whole point of boundaries is actually to talk less, interact in an unhealthy way less, and to find more peace, because you are focusing on what you control, and you are letting go of everything that you don't control in this relationship, okay? So if a boundary is not meant to control or change the other person, then what the heck is it meant to do? Well, boundaries protect us, right? Whether they be physical boundaries or they are relational boundaries, the whole point of a boundary is protection. So you can ask yourself, when you set the boundary, do I have in mind my own protection, or am I thinking about how I can change or get the results from the other person that I want? If you find that your spirit or your thought is, oh man, I'm going to change them, then you're probably not headed down the path to a healthy boundary in your life, okay? Now, the next, I guess, fundamental aspect or characteristic of a boundary is that boundaries are concrete. And what that means is it's quantifiable. In an idea, it's tangible. So boundaries are concrete. They're not figurative. They're not ambiguous. My favorite example of this is when parents say, I've got this great boundary in my house. You will respect me. And I go, oh, okay. So what does that mean? Well, everybody knows what that means. And when you really get down to it, okay, you're going to set a boundary on respect. And as the parent who is trying to do such a good job in parenting, you believe that your child knows what that means. And I usually guide parents down a different path. Forget about the respect thing, because you know what? There's no way that you're going to come to an agreement on whether or not everybody's respecting everybody in the house. But what you can do is relate to and use what I call the relationship basics, okay? And so if we're referring to those, and that's a whole nother discussion that I'll get into another time. But me personally, I'm not going to be in conversation with, and I'm not going to engage with, I'm not going to have a conversation with anybody who's yelling at me, cussing at me, putting me down, throwing something at me, or trying to physically intimidate me. Okay? So when parents define that, you see how concrete that is? I am not going to allow anyone to be in conversation with me. I'm not going to engage with anybody who is cussing at me, yelling at me, speaking down to me, calling me names, or threatening me, or damaging my property, or doing anything like that around me. Okay. So another concrete example of a concrete boundary is I want the trash taken out on Wednesdays. Or you may not do drugs in this home. Another concrete boundary, if I believe that you are smoking weed at any point in time, I am not going to allow you to drive our family car. Okay, so you see how when boundaries are concrete, there's no wiggle room. There's no misunderstanding. It's just straightforward. Healthy boundaries are simple and concrete. So far, we've said that boundaries are meant to protect us, right? They're not meant to change others. They're meant to protect us, and they are concrete. Now, this third element or characteristic of a boundary is that you control the follow-through. Now, you'll notice I'm not using the word consequences. I'm saying you control the follow-through. In other words, what I'm going to do if my boundary is crossed, I control. Now, I am not joking when I say almost once a month I get a family who's contacted me who's worked with another therapist or another some sort of center or something like that, and they bring in this contract that the other therapist has had the whole family sign. And they say, hey, this is where we need to start. It's so bad. Our kid signed this, and then they didn't do it. Can you believe that, Brandon? And I say, yeah, I can believe that. I still haven't met a child who follows through on some sort of contract that they've signed, unless they're a really, really compliant child. But if you get to the point that you need that contract, the problem is they're just signing it to move on. They're signing it because you're forcing them to sign it. But you see, a boundary, in a healthy boundary, I don't need you to sign a contract. I don't even need you to agree. I control the follow-through. Now, there may or may not be consequences that the other person cares about. And sometimes when you follow through in protecting yourself, to be honest, the other person might not feel bad or feel like there have been any consequences. And I know that's a letdown to a lot of parents, right? Because we have such a huge stake in whether or not we have punished enough, okay? Now, if I control the follow-through, I first have to figure out, well, what the heck do I have control over, right? And that's the whole point of boundaries, is feeling more in control. You find more happiness, you get rid of your resentments because you are more in control of protecting yourself. So what do I control? Well, I control, obviously, myself. That's what people usually say. But I also control my things. I control the favors that I do. I control my money. I control, to some extent, my home. I control the resources that I give. I control my time, my efforts, my energy. Okay? Now, I'm sure that there's more that I control, but those are some of the things that I control, most of the things that I control. Now, taking this a little bit further, I control who drives my car. I control whether or not I pay for the next season of football. I control whether or not I give money for you to go out and hang out, right? I control my house. I can't force you to do chores, but there are things and elements that you may or may not have access to when it comes to my home, and whether or not I feel like giving it to you. So hopefully you understand some of the things that you control. And I suggest that you write down everything you control so that when you're figuring out boundaries, you have a list to refer to in terms of how you can follow through in a healthy way. Now, after you figure out some of the things that you have control over, I want you to write down some things that you don't have control over. And this is going to be a hard list to make, but it's going to be an important list to make because it is your job to let it go. Okay? Don't get bogged down. Don't get honed in on those things that you don't control, because that's just going to create resentments, frustration. That's where parents get in that rut that they don't feel like they can get out of. Okay? Now, some of the things that you don't control, for instance, is whether or not your child listens to you. You do not control who they hang out with, what they say at school. You do not control their decision to use drugs and alcohol. I know that you feel like you should, and you're probably sitting, some of you are sitting here going, yes, I do, Brandon. Oh, I can stop it. But when it comes down to it, you don't control the final decision when it comes to your child's behavior. Okay? You don't control the resources that others give them. You don't control when they come home. I know you think that you do, but at the end of the day, unless you're willing to get physical, you don't control that. You can't control their decision to do chores or not to do chores. So really figure out what you don't control so you can let go of it, so you can get your mind on the things that you do control, so that you can get in the mindset of healthy boundary setting. What I found with a lot of parents is that when they are struggling hard to set a boundary, or several boundaries, what they're really struggling with is letting go of or being honest about the things that they don't control. You're getting stuck as a parent on the things that you should control, not the things that you actually control. So do a lot of work and soul searching to let that go. I know it's not fair. I know it's not right. I know that you grew up thinking that it was going to be different. But trust me, for your own mental health, for your own sanity, let go of the things that you cannot control. Okay? One of my therapists that I was talking to about boundaries made a great comment the other day. And what she said was, as we were talking about boundaries, a boundary is where you end and I begin. And I love that imagery because when you start thinking of it that way, you get into the spirit of boundaries. It's about you. It's not about changing them, right? They're not really involved. I get that the other people or person is a part of the process, but really it's where you end and I begin. So I loved that. So let's get to an example of setting a boundary, okay? One that I like, one that I have in my own life is, I don't care who you are, if you're cussing at me, yelling at me, if you're putting me down, if you're speaking to me in a threatening tone, I will not engage in conversation or engage in any interaction with you. This topic, now remember, the topic, okay, so we've got a boundary topic. The boundary topic is, I'm not going to engage with anybody who is putting me down, yelling at me, cussing at me, or threatening me, okay? I didn't say anything about respect, okay? That's very concrete. Now, my follow-through is I'm not going to engage with that person, and for your own well-being, it's probably good, and everybody else's, it's probably a good idea for you to be concrete in how long a break you're going to need to take, okay? If I'm a parent, I'm probably going to take a day or two, right? It might be the rest of that day, or it might be the rest of that day and the next day. I don't know. I never tell people This is the boundary that you should set, and this is how you should follow through with it. That's totally up to you, because you have to figure out if you're willing or able to follow through. Sometimes you're just not willing, and you've got to be honest, right? You got to be honest that, hey, you know what? There's going to be circumstances that I will not follow through with this boundary. And once you are honest about that, then you can take accountability for not being willing or not being able to follow through with that boundary. And some boundaries you want to set and follow through with, you just don't have control over. And so that goes back to being honest about what you control. But let's say that my boundary is just what I said. If you are yelling at me, putting me down, cussing at me, if you are threatening me, I'm not going to engage with you. And then I'm going to be concrete about the time for the rest of whatever day it is. Okay? Now, here's the problem. I've got to be okay with either side of the boundary. If you follow my boundary, I'm going to be stoked because we can have engagement, we can talk about whatever the issue is, and move on with our lives and hopefully solve something important. But I'm also okay, I might not be happy with, but I'm also okay with the other side of the boundary. And that's, you're not following my boundary. Okay, well, I'm just not interacting with you for the day. Now, I've set this boundary ahead of time and I've been consistent, so you probably know that this never works with me. And I'm going to be consistent every single time. Even if it's some really important conversation that we both think has to happen, I'm not engaging with you when you speak to me in a threatening tone, if you're yelling at me, if you're cussing at me, or if you're putting me down. It's just not going to happen. Not engaging with you. Okay? That's what I control. Now, again, I don't like having to follow through with the boundary, but I'm okay with it. I've taken responsibility for it. I am practicing self-care, and I'm not going to be as angry, and there's not going to be as much chaos in the home because I have made the decision to follow through unconditionally. And then here's the buy-in. Okay? Remember, you have to, as a parent, remember that the point of boundaries is to reduce the chaos. So if you keep nagging, hey, you're crossing my boundary, if you keep reminding them over and over again, if while they're crossing the boundary, you yell or you intimidate them or you engage in chaos, then you just miss the entire point of setting boundaries. You see, as soon as that conversation goes bad, I'm going to respond exactly this way. Yeah, I'm not going to say anything. And because I'm going to wait for my opportunity to get the heck out of there and go on with the rest of my day not engaging with you, not engaging in any insanity. You've already crossed my boundary. And I know that my follow-through is reasonable. And so even when you start ramping it up and trying to engage me, oh, I hate you, Dad. You are the worst person in the world. Oh, see, you're not even talking to me. I can't believe you would just ignore me right now. Gosh, this is what you always do. Oh, my gosh, you are the worst. Even when you do that, you see, you've already crossed my boundary. I've chosen not to engage with you, and I am out of here. I'm not going to let you suck me in. Okay? I'm going to stand firm in my boundaries. I'm going to stand firm in the part where I'm not going to treat you poorly back. You see, I have chosen as a father to take full control over how I behave at all times. Okay? And I can do that because I know I'm protected by my boundary. Okay? Now, another example of a boundary is the black bag boundary, and I love the black bag boundary, okay? And it's one that a lot of families and parents have implemented into their homes, and it's just an example. I'm not saying everybody should implement this. Not everybody has the need to implement this. I don't even know that it's right for most people. It's probably only right for a few people. But the black boundary comes about when first, let's take a look at what do I want to protect, right? And this complaint comes in weekly. My kid won't pick up around the house. They won't even pick up their own stuff. I can't get them to pick up their room. I can't get them to pick up the family room. They take off their shoes and throw it at the door. They leave their toys out. Their jackets are on the couch. Their dirty laundry and underwear is on the floor. I've heard some wild stories about some amazingly dirty teens. Okay, it's that time of their development, and I don't know. But what happens is this issue becomes all-encompassing in a family. It becomes the discussion day after day, night after night, morning after morning. It becomes the first thing that parents are thinking about when they wake up, and the last thing that they are yelling about when they go before they go to bed. And so we want to eliminate that chaos in the family. I can't make things perfect, but what you can do, again, is set healthy boundaries. So, what are we trying to protect? We're trying to protect the home, the cleanliness of the home. You worked hard for your home. You want your home to be orderly, and it's just not right. It's not in the clean state that you would like it. And so remember that boundary setting, a part of the boundary spirit, is to get into problem-solving mode rather than punishment and change my child mode. Okay? So if I'm trying to solve this problem, well, the first thing is, okay, what am I trying to solve again? Oh, yeah, I want a cleaner house, and I don't want to have to spend hours picking up after my son or daughter. Hey, I get it. Cool. So the black bag boundary is an example of an easy way to set a boundary and follow through without the buy-in of kids, right? Because what parents have done for generations and generations is, I'm going to take away your phone. And before they had, we had phones, they took away skateboards and things that they played with, and they took away privileges of going out. And it's like, but at some point, parents get to the point, they go, I don't have anything else to take care of. In fact, I take things away and they laugh. The kids don't even care. They say, well, okay, you've done that before. And at most, taking things away works for about 2 weeks. That's at most. Usually it's like a couple of hours. But the most it works for, and this is where parents get kind of like sucked into thinking that punishment and reward works, but the longest it works for is like 2 weeks, right? But if the black bag boundary is, okay, I want a clean house, I want an orderly house. That's the topic. I'm not going to allow you to continue to put your things everywhere. Okay? Now, I can't force you to clean up. I've had all the conversations, tried everything, and I want to reduce the chaos. So you know what? I'm going to take a black bag on, let's say, Wednesday nights, and I'm going to put everything of yours. I'm going to go through the living room, the kitchen, everywhere that I can. And if it's yours and it's out of place, it goes into the black bag. Then I'm going to end with your room. Because that's not your room. That's my room that I'm allowing you to stay in. And I am going to put all the junk on the floor and the dishes that you've left. Well, I'm bummed that you left them. I don't need them anyways. I'm going to throw those in there and keep you from using my dishes anymore. And I am going to tie that black bag up. And I'm even going to be nice. You see, I'm going to label it. I'm going to put, hey, this is Johnny's stuff. And I'm going to put it on the side of the house, and you'll know that when you're missing clothes, or you're missing your phone, or you're missing that love letter that you got from Susie, or you are missing something else that is important for you to have, or your uniform for football, you know where it's going to be. It's going to be on the side of the house. But you see, I took care of my house. I didn't yell. I didn't nag. I didn't even get into a conversation. And I made sure that I was reasonable, and you have access to your clothes. Now, if you don't mind everything being in black bags, then I don't mind it, and we're going to go on our merry way. But if you do mind this happening every Wednesday night, then by Wednesday night, you're going to have to take care of your stuff. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I'm not going to yell about it anymore. In fact, I'm going to kind of giggle to myself when I put these things and I'm dumping your latest box of Cheetos or bag of Cheetos that you didn't finish in with that bag. And I'm going to be honest, it's going to be kind of funny to me. But you see, I'm going to reduce the chaos. And you might be mad at me in the beginning, but if I am consistent, my child will most likely get over their anger, get over their frustration, and in order for them to get the results they want, they'll have to just figure it out around my boundary. Now, the spirit of the boundary encompasses a few things. Number one, you've got to get in protection mode. Number two, you got to get in problem-solving mode. You have to detach with love. You have to start forgiving and make the decision to not resent them anymore for their character flaws or their developmental defects at the moment, so to speak. Okay? And that's really hard for parents because parents believe that their first role when their kids are teens is to teach them a lesson and make sure that they're perfect in life. And that's just not true. Your first role is to have a relationship with them. And when you have healthy boundaries and you stop the yelling and you stop the nagging, what's wild is you can have a healthy relationship with even the most difficult child. But again, the consistency is key. If you're not consistent, right? The first time you follow through with the boundary, it might not feel so good. And the second time, you might want to ramp up or ramp down the consequences that your child feels, but refrain from doing that because you are going to want to do that. Okay? Because you're used to controlling every little thing. No, it's just, these are my boundaries. I follow through unconditionally and I'm consistent. The consequences are yours to deal with, son or daughter. Okay? And again, now those consequences might be great, right? If my boundary is that, you know what, when you go off on me, I don't do any favors for you that day, there might be no consequences. You might not need anything from me. But you might need something great from me. You might need money for prom and for me to help you rent that tux at the last minute. But if that day was the day that you yelled at me, and what parents want to do is they want to ramp down or ramp up consequences because they're thinking of punishment. So to be in the spirit of boundary setting, you have to get out of that need to punish or that need to reward or that need to punish just enough or that need to not punish so much that you need to protect them. And so a lot of that goes on. That's another block for parents in setting boundaries is they want to protect their child from too many consequences and then ramp up the consequences when they feel like there's not enough consequences to justify the right punishment. You know that you have finally reached the spirit of boundary setting when the language you use has changed. In fact, you'll be speaking much less. You're not going to be using as many words, and you're not going to be as harsh in tone, and you're not going to have that desperation that is behind the language and tones that you use because you're protecting yourself. And what boundaries does in the end for a relationship is it makes the opportunity for love, unconditional love, far greater. So I hope that this helps in your boundary setting, and I am excited to hear from you guys about some of the healthy boundaries that you set. Thank you.